ladies and gentlemen, the Innervale Club of Madras is very happy to welcome Shri V. Sriram as the speaker of the day. We welcome past international Innervale President Kamala Ramakrishnan, respected district chairman, Association Council member Usha Sarodi, members of the district executive committee, co-presidents and members. We are happy to welcome members of Rotary Club of Madras South, the parent club of Sriram. We also have with us members from districts 320 and 321. Welcome.
320, 321.
A full and exhaustive introduction of Sriram would extend over many pages and minutes, time that we would rather spend listening to him. I will do my best to give a brief introduction that will also do him justice. Sriram is an entrepreneur, columnist, music historian, and heritage activist. He writes a regular column for The Hindu. He's the editor of Madras Musings, a fortnightly which was brought out by S. Muthaiah, who was passionate about chronicling the history of Madras. Sriram continues his crusade of not letting Madras, the history and heritage be forgotten. The concept of heritage walks in Madras was started by Sriram in 1999. He has conducted more than 75 walks. His blog, Madras, Heritage and Carnatic Music, is avidly followed by the many lovers of music and heritage. As an author, he is best known for Carnatic Summer, Life of 20 Great Exponents, The Devadasi and the Saint, The Life and Times of Bangalore Nagaratnamma, Historic Residences of Chennai, Fourscore and more, The History of the Music Academy, and many, many more. His talks are riveting, not just for the wealth of facts and anecdotes, but also for the wonderful thread of humor woven through it. He is nothing but thorough when he takes up a subject. I recently had the privilege of listening to him on the history of medicine in Madras. The wealth of information that he gave on that occasion left many a person in the medical field bemused, for they were totally unaware of it. Sriram has always agreed when we have invited him to talk to us. You may be wondering, why a talk on Varanasi when he is an expert on Madras? The Association of Innervale Clubs of India will be holding the triennial conference in Varanasi in February 2022. Hence, we requested him to speak to us about that great city, almost like a curtain raiser to the event. Sriram had also started heritage tours to other parts of India. Varanasi was to have been the next one in September 2020, being the 100th in his series of talks, walks, and tours. The pandemic has put a hold on the trip, but we can hear Sriram talk about it. Before I hand you over to Sriram, a few niceties we will be following today. Everyone will be muted, but please do keep your videos on. Questions can be typed in the chat box and will be taken up at the end of the talk. Over to you, Sriram. I will now make you a co-host.
Thank you.
Why? I'm not able to open participants. Okay.
Javanti, you'll have to enable screen sharing.
Yes, I've done that.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, Javanti, for that very nice introduction. And thank you, friends, for all of you for being here today to be a part of this virtual, I will not call it a tour of Varanasi because it is impossible to conduct a tour of Varanasi even across several months. And this is just a talk, and it will only highlight a few features of this great city. I would like to also personally say that I dedicate this particular talk to my mother. I wanted her to join. I don't know if she has, because she said she will, but she's now with my grandmother who turned 98 yesterday. And so I don't know whether she's logged in. But my mother was the person who would always talk about Varanasi, particularly when we were living in Calcutta. In those days, you know, studying in a fairly anglicized environment, I used to very often personally sneer at the fact that somebody could be warm and appreciative about Varanasi. I mean, the only thing that we knew in those days was that it was incredibly filthy. The streets were very narrow. There was a lot of dirt. There was a whole lot of fecal coliform in the Ganga. And it was a wonder that anybody who bathed in that river survived, and so on and so forth. But over a period of time, as I began to get more and more involved in reading, and particularly reading Sanskrit and Tamil poetry, trying to understand a little bit of Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas and so on, I began to really appreciate the fact that there was something very magnetic about Varanasi. I mean, after all these people who had been there, and that is not just Buddha and the Shankar and Adi Shankara, but right down to our times in this 21st century when people keep wanting to go back. And it's just not people from India, people from all over the world who want to come and experience and be a part of Varanasi. I realized that there is something very incredible about this city. And Sharda and I, as Javanti pointed out, we were very keen that we should do a heritage tour. And then I had been reading a lot about this city over 2 years or so in preparation as and when this tour would happen. And then just before the pandemic, the two of us visited Varanasi and we spent a few days there. And yes, it was incredibly filthy. The streets were horribly congested. There was chaos of a kind that I don't think any of us, you know, the upper middle class people and the upper class people that we are, I don't think any of us can ever be prepared for that kind of congestion and the way in which people live in that city. And this was sometime, I don't know when we went sometime, maybe this COVID had not come at that time. But I remember remarking to Sharda in one of the bazaars, imagine if there was some kind of a disaster, either a disease or a war or something like this, how would anybody escape? Nobody can, because there is no space for anybody to run anywhere. You will have auto rickshaws, you will have two-wheelers, all of them blaring at the top of their capacity of their horns. Then cows walking along with you, very, very slowly weaving their way among the crowds, beggars, shopkeepers, all kinds of things. It's an Orientalist's dream of India come true in every way. You know, all that snake charmer, the rope trick, the elephant and the tiger, the kind of thing that people in the British Raj kept writing all the time about. It's that kind of a city. Yes, there have been several attempts at improving it, at bringing it to some semblance of order. But I guess the DNA of that city really thrives on that chaos. And in the midst of all that is the incredible energy that you can see, that zest for living that the average Varanasi resident has. Not one of them you can find with a glum look or complaining about the fact that they are living in this city. They are all bright and energetic. They are pushing their way through. It's like boarding a train in Bombay. You know, everybody is pushing their way through. Only in Bombay, they're all a little grim. Whereas over here, everybody is smiling, everybody is talking to each other, and you can see that religion is right up there. It's the thing that keeps this entire city going. So with that as a background, I've put together a small presentation to help me with this story, and I'm going to take you through that. So the first thing about Varanasi is the Ganga. That is the lifeline of this city, and it is the lifeline of the entire length and breadth of that Gangetic plain. And sometimes when I read about the fact that the glaciers are melting and that ice will not be, that we are in the grip of global warming, I sometimes wonder as to what would happen to all these cities if the Ganga begins to play truant and something goes wrong with the eternal nature of this river. So this particular photograph we took at around 5 in the morning when people had not yet begun to come towards the Ganga to the extent that they would later on during the day. And this is what really defines the city. Everybody talks about Gangaji. Everybody will keep, their whole life revolves around who resides in which ghat. I'm not talking about the newer parts of Varanasi. I'm talking about the older parts of the city where you will find that all references are to which ghat are you living in. Are you living near Kedar Ghat? Are you living near Assi Ghat? Where are you? Are you near Sindhya Ghat, Vijayanagaram Ghat? That is the reference. So the river is really what defines the city, and its entire life hums along this particular wonderful river. In the rainy season, it is right up to the brim, and then during the summer season, it gradually begins to recede. And you find that the river here, you can see this is in winter when the river has actually receded quite a bit. It is, and the locals tell me that in earlier years, the river was not receding to this extent in winter, but nowadays you find that the water comes down to a great extent. So perhaps this is all a harbinger of more troublesome time to come for the Ganga and for Varanasi itself. But long before modern, yes, Javanti?
Can you just mute everyone, please? There is some disturbance. Under the participants list, you'll find it.
Yeah, let me see how I can mute them all. I don't see a button for muting everybody here. 1 minute. Yes. 1 second. I think I have muted everyone. Can you just, I think so. All right. I haven't muted myself, I hope. No. Okay. But the thing is, the Ganga is one aspect, and the other is the spiritual aspect of this city. And we realize today we call it the bastion of Hinduism. For some people, that's a good word. For some people, that's a bad word. The world is heavily polarized based on this definition. But long before all these quarrels came about, this was a city that had not only Hinduism, it had Buddhism and Jainism as well. The area just to the north of this place is a beautiful grove, was once a beautiful grove. And that was known as the Saranganatha, the Lord of the Deer, because that was supposed to have been given by the king of Kashi for people to meditate. And it was a place where the deer could frolic without any trouble. And if the deer could live peacefully, the sages could also live peacefully over there. So Shreyansnath, who is one of the Tirthankaras of the Jain religion, he was actually born here, he preached here, and he lived here. And then what happens is sometime between the 5th and the 4th century before Christ, the Buddha comes to Varanasi. The Buddha has undertaken meditation in Gaya. He has attained jnana. He has become the Buddha. And then he arrives at Varanasi, where 5 of his chosen disciples are already waiting for him in Saranganatha, or this park, which was also known as Mriga Dhava. Mriga means deer, and Dhava means the refuge of the deer. Just like Mahavishnu is known as Madhava because of he is the refuge of Ma or Mahalakshmi. So that way, Mriga Dhava means that he who is that place which is the refuge of the deer. And so the Buddha repairs to Mriga Dhava, the forest over there, and there he sits along with his disciples and he gives his first sermon. And that sermon is recognized as the Dharma Chakra Pravartana Pravachana, which is basically what it means is he set the wheel of Dharma in motion by speaking about it at this particular location to his 5 chosen disciples. It is also agreed that the Buddha then spent the rainy season over here in a place that was known as the Mrigagandha Kutika, which is a small hut, and that is where he lived and preached. And therefore, this became one of the several sacred spots for Buddhism. And in the 2nd century before Christ, when Ashoka converts to Christianity, Ashoka expresses, converts to Buddhism, Ashoka expresses a desire to travel to all the locations associated with the Buddha. He then comes to Sarnath and he then orders that the great stupa be built. Now, let us not forget that this was not the only stupa that was here. There were already stupas built even earlier. It is said that one of them had the relics of the Buddha in them. And thereafter, Ashoka built his great stupa over here. And by the 2nd century, when Ashoka had built his stupa, this had become a great center for Buddhism. It is said that at one point of time, there were almost 3,000 monks who were residing in Mrigadhava, and they were learning and they were preaching Buddhism. This was not just one building that you see over here. This was a complex. It was a university. There were several teachers, there were students, there were practice sessions, all kinds of sermons were going on. People were coming here to listen. So it was a great center of learning. And then what happens is, by the 12th century, this has actually flourished right up to the 12th century, AD, post the arrival of Christ. It has still continued. And then come the Turks, and it is the invasion of the Turks, particularly led by Qutbuddin Aibak, that destroys this entire university and this settlement of Sarnath. And thereafter, Sarnath remains a mound till the 19th century, when Sir Alexander Cunningham undertakes excavations over here and begins exposing the wonders of this particular place. Let's not forget that the symbol of India today, the 3 lions, the lion capital with the Ashoka Chakra, is actually from a pillar over here. When you go to Sarnath, you will actually be able to see the pillar still standing where it is. The capital was hived off, and that was later discovered and is today in the Sarnath Museum. And when you look at the shining colors of the Chunar stone with which it was sculpted, I made the mistake of asking the curator of the museum, is this the original or is it a 20th century replica? Why is it shining so much? The man was really offended when I asked him this. He said, what do you mean? Asking if it's a 20th century replica. This is the original, and we have kept it here so carefully. This is the symbol of India. And above it, there was an Ashoka Chakra that was mounted. That was broken, and several pieces of it have been discovered. Today, if you look at the symbol of the Supreme Court of India, you will find that is the only symbol which incorporates in full the Ashoka Chakra and then the lions holding up the base, and you get an idea as to how the pillars stood at the time of Ashoka. Sarnath is a complete contrast to Varanasi. Total silence, trees. You can just wander around, enjoy the place. You can imagine that you are in the presence of the Buddha, and that in a way prepares and conditions you to what you are going to see in Varanasi thereafter. Varanasi, as I said, was a great spiritual center, but without Shankara, it is very doubtful whether it would have attained the exalted status that we all know of it today. Shankara, as we all know, comes to Kashi or Varanasi because he wants to challenge Mandana Mishra to a duel. Mandana Mishra follows what is known as Purva Mimamsa, which is a different form of philosophy as opposed to the Advaita, which Shankara is expounding. And it is said that Mandana Mishra was a ritualist, and he was so knowledgeable in whatever he spoke that even the parrots of his house used to argue with each other on very esoteric aspects of Hindu philosophy. His wife was a great scholar herself, and it is said that the debate between Mandana Mishra and Shankara happens with Mandana Mishra's wife as the judge between the two of them, and finally she upholds what Shankara says. Mandana Mishra then becomes a disciple of Shankara. He becomes a sannyasi, and he is the eldest among Shankara's disciples, far older to Shankara. Eventually, Shankara will bring this man from the north and make him the head pontiff of the Sringeri Sharada Peetham in South India. And therefore, he becomes the first sannyasi to become the head of the Sringeri Mutt in South India. So this is, of course, a Ravi Verma painting of Shankara and his disciples. Shankara has left behind for us several hymns on Kasi, the Ganga, Manikarnika, the goddess Annapurna, Lord Kala Bhairava, and so on. And when you read some of them, you begin to understand what a wonderful description of Kasi Shankara is leaving behind for all of us. For instance, his description of the Ganga. But before we go to the Ganga, I've talked about Shankara, but what is it that draws all these people here? It is the temple of Lord Vishwanatha, which is one of the 12 Jyotirlingas of India. The 12 holy spots where there is a Shivalinga, which it is said that we must visit at one time or the other. This is also one of the famous Char Dhams, the 4 great locations of India that we must visit. One is Kashi, then you've got Dwarka, then you've got Puri, and then down south you've got Rameshwaram. Some people say Badri is the 4th Dham. There is also that. But in all of this, even those who accept Badrinath to be the 4th Dham, they will always say that visiting Kashi is a must. And we always have this Kashi Rameshwaram. In Tamil, you know, whenever people talk about traveling all over the place, they will say Kashi Rameshwaram ellam poittu vanda, which basically means you traveled all over the place. So Kashi for most people of South India was one end of the country, northernmost point to which they wanted to go. And Rameshwaram was naturally the southern point. Both incidentally are Jyotirlingas. And what are Jyotirlingas? Essentially, the famous story of the quarrel between Vishnu and Brahma as to who was greater. Lord Shiva then appears as a fiery lingam which has got no ending and no beginning. Brahma takes the form of a swan and flies to the top, saying that he will find out where the Shivalinga, the summit of the Shivalinga is. Vishnu takes the form of a boar and burrows into the earth to find out where the origin of the Shivalinga is. After some time, Vishnu becomes tired and comes back and accepts defeat. Brahma, flying upwards, finds a Ketaki flower, the Tarambu, falling. And he says, he strikes a deal with the flower and says that I will take you back to Vishnu and say that I plucked you from the top of the Shivalinga. And you have to agree with what I say. So Brahma brings back the Ketaki and offers it to Vishnu as proof that he had seen the top of the Shivalinga. Vishnu is ready to believe it. At that time, Shiva appears from the Shivalinga and curses Brahma that he will never have a temple for himself. Of course, this story is said with various permutations and combinations. There are other versions as well. And even today, you don't offer the Ketaki as a flower to Lord Shiva because it was a willing participant in a charade. And then Shiva plucks the 5th head of Brahma with a nail. Nakebhya Satrasyan, which is with one nail, he torments Brahma and plucks his head off. And that head, of course, sticks to his hand. Then he becomes Bhairava. He wanders around the world seeking expiation for his sin of removing the head of Brahma. And finally, he becomes Shiva once again. So this Jyotirlinga, the origin of the Jyotirlinga is that, and Lord Vishwanatha, whom you see over here, is also one of the 12 Jyotirlingas. It is said to be a Shivalinga made of an emerald. Today, when you go there, of course, you can't blame the temple. Historically, the temple has been a victim, and therefore it is one of the most chaotic spots possible. Amidst all that pushing and pulling, you can only wonder at the calm with which Lord Vishwanatha has been watching this fun going on for centuries and centuries and centuries. And sometimes you want to laugh with the Lord, and you can sometimes imagine the Lord is also laughing with you, because there will be the Panda behind you. He will be shouting some mantras into your ear. You will be trying to say all the mantras that you knew, but you can't say it because you're so heavily distracted at that point of time. They'll produce a mug, a plastic mug of milk, and tell you do Abhishekam with that. And then you pour the milk on the Lord, and then you come away. You really need to be Vishwanatha to tolerate all that goes on in his name over there. They'll fling the flowers on him. Somebody will apply something on your forehead. But in the midst of all this, there are people weeping, expressing thanks for miracles that have happened in their lives. For some of them, it's a journey of a lifetime. They have saved up for years and years and years to come to Kashi to see this Lord Vishwanatha. And that is what we are just not prepared for, because we are so cynical in our upbringing. We are taught to make fun of everything. And then when you see this completely transparent faith, which has brought them all this distance, people with diseases, people with disabilities, somehow managing, blind people, walking and feeling their way through, they are not going to be seeing the Sivalinga, but they know that they have been in the presence of the Sivalinga. That is all that matters. And that is what really moves you when you go into this particular temple. Next to this shrine, not very far away, is the Annapurna temple. But before I go to that, I must tell you a little bit about the history of the Kashi Vishwanath temple, perhaps one of the oldest shrines in existence. And then suffered a long series of demolitions and reconstructions. So we know that in the 12th century, when the Turks came here and they destroyed Sarnath, they also demolished the Kashi Vishwanatha Swami temple. Thereafter, during the reign of Sultan Iltutmish in Delhi, a merchant of this region, he rebuilds the temple to a certain extent. Then once again, during the rule of the Lodhis, the temple is destroyed. Then during Akbar's time, Raja Todarmal, who was after all his, what was he? He was his brother-in-law. He builds the temple, and it is believed that Akbar actually funded a part of the construction of the temple. And then in the 17th century, Aurangzeb, having fallen out with his kinsmen who were the Rajput Kachwahas, who were administering this temple, decided to make an example of it, demolished the temple and built the Jnanvapi mosque just next to it. The painting that you see over here is by James Prinsep in the 19th century. And he says this is the Vishweshwar temple. So you can see parts of the pillars of the structure. And then you can also see a couple of tombs. And then behind it, you can see the dome of the Jnanvapi mosque. So there was hardly anything that qualified for a temple. But when you look at it this way, you can also probably you can come to this conclusion that Prinsep probably understood that this entire place was called Vishweshwar because this was the area that the temple once occupied. Because when he came here, there was a functional temple. It's a wonder that despite all this demolition and reconstruction, the worship of Vishwanath has never ceased. It has continued to happen despite all the turmoil that has happened over the centuries. And today, when you go there, this is how you need to go into the temple. You cross the heavily barricaded Jnanvapi mosque where no prayers are allowed at this point of time. You take a completely circuitous route and finally you arrive at the Vishwanath Mandir. The Vishwanath Mandir as it stands today is largely the construction of Ahalyabai Holkar, who was the Maratha queen of Indore in the 18th century. It was her generosity that ensured that the shrine came back to a certain extent. But if you want to really understand what was the extent of this temple, you need to go outside the temple and wander around this area. Suddenly, you will find a huge stone Nandi, huge, lying on a side street, gifted by the Ranas of Nepal to the Kashi Vishwanath temple. So that Nandi faced the Sivalinga inside a temple precinct at one point of time. Then the streets have all come up in the middle, other structures have come up. So the Nandi is completely dislocated. He is lying by himself in one street, completely uncared for. Then you have the Annapurna temple. This must have been the goddess who was part of the Kashi Vishwanath temple, because Shankara says, Sri Vishweshwara Manaprasadana Karim, one who fulfills the desires of Vishweshwara. So he clearly establishes Annapurna to be the consort of Vishweshwara, but she is in a completely different little shrine by herself, inside a magnificent silver canopy, and fronting her is this idol of Lord Shiva as Bhairava, holding forth his begging bowl. This temple comes into its own during the time of Deepavali, when the gold Annapurna is brought out along with two companion goddesses, and is placed in what is called Annakut, which is basically food of all items will be placed all around the goddess. The goddess herself will be inside a canopy that is completely made of laddus. It's called Laddu Ter. And this is completely sponsored by the Chettiars of Karaikudi, the Nagarathar community of Karaikudi. More on them when we go a little further down this presentation. But the Annapurna temple, as I said, is now a completely different shrine. You have to walk some distance, and when you walk, you realize how big probably the Vishweshwar temple at one time would have been. And then you have the fearsome Kala Bhairava temple. Kala Bhairava is considered to be the protecting deity, the guardian deity of Varanasi. A huge and frightening manifestation of Shiva with a garland of skulls, as you can see over here. And in his mouth, don't miss the hookah. A completely North Indian addition. I don't think in the South we would ever accept Shiva as somebody who is forever intoxicated with cannabis or bhang or whatever. But in the North, that is very much a part of Shiva worship. And so you can see over here, he's having his own pipe. This is a very tall idol, completely encased in silver. It's a completely different temple as well. It's not part of the Vishweshwar shrine. Then we come to the Ganga. When you go to Varanasi, there are two ways of seeing the Ganga. One is you just walk along the banks, which by itself is a very interesting experience, but it can be very tiring because you don't, there are 88 ghats on the Ganga. And you just can't walk to all of them because there's a lot of climbing up and climbing down because all the ghats are at multiple levels. They're all contiguous to each other. You can walk from one ghat to the other ghat to the other ghat, but it's very taxing on the feet. The best way to see the ghats is to get into a boat, hire a ferry, and then the big advantage is you get to see the architecture of the ghats very well. If you're walking along the ghats, you don't get to see them because you've got to be craning your neck to be looking upwards, and you're always distracted by all that is happening around you. But when you get into the boat and then you begin to sail, and remember to tell the boatman to keep his mouth shut. This is very important because they think that they have to become V. Sri Ram and babble, 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 babble all the time. And that is when I realized what a pest I am during my own heritage walks. And so you keep telling them, please keep quiet, we just want to see, we know, we will take care of it, and so on. But they will still come up with all their legends. It's very interesting to hear their history as well. And let's not forget that they are part of a huge ecosystem whose entire life depends on the river. If the water in the river comes down, they have no livelihood. They don't have anything to earn. We need to encourage them. We need to get into those boats. We need to go along with them and see and listen to their explanations and the pride with which they will talk about Varanasi and, you know, the various colorful aspects of the city. There were certain things that I learned from them. I'll be telling you that in a short while. But as I said, there are 88 ghats. And the city itself gets its name from two rivers, the Varuna and the Asi, which are two tributaries to the Ganga, which join together over here. And that is how the name Varanasi comes. And you have the Varuna Ghat and you have the Asi Ghat at two ends. The Asi Ghat is where you normally board the boat. And then from there, you take the boat and then you go along the river. And as you go along, there are out of these 88 ghats, each one of them with a name. You have some which are more important than the others. So you've got the Harishchandra Ghat, then you've got the Dashashwamedh Ghat, then you've got the Manikarnika Ghat, which is where the cremations go on all the time, day and night without break. And then you have a few more ghats as you go along. But these are the most important ones. The Asi Ghat, then you've got the Dashashwamedh Ghat, the Harishchandra Ghat, the Manikarnika Ghat, and then a few others as you go along. This is the Manikarnika Ghat. Very, very interestingly, the name Manikarnika comes from the fact that when Shiva's first wife Sati died, he carried her on his shoulder and wandered around the world as a madman. And Vishnu decided to break him out of that shock and cut the body into several pieces using his Sudarshan Chakra. And wherever a piece of the body fell, a Shakti temple came up. So for instance, we say that the hip, the girdle fell in Kanchipuram, which is why it is called Kanchipuram. Kanchi means the girdle. Similarly, Kamakhya in Assam is where the uterus is supposed to have fallen. That's why it's called the Yoni Pitha. This is where the earring of the goddess fell, and therefore this is known as the Manikarnika Ghat. This is the place where the earring has fallen. And this is the place, as I said, where 24/7 cremations will be going on all the time. And when you come down in the boat, you will find logs of wood arriving in one direction, pyres being built in the other. There is an electric crematorium by the side, and you will find the smoke blackening this entire place. This is the heart of Varanasi. And the Harishchandra Ghat is a little less so. But remember, the great denouement in Harishchandra's life was played out in Varanasi. When the wife arrives with the dead body of the son and wants to cremate him, and Harishchandra is working for the people who man the crematorium, and then he says, you need to pay a fee. And his wife says that I don't have any money with me. And he says, you are wearing your Mangal Sutra, give it to me as your fee. And then she realizes that he is her husband, because his wife had the boon that none other than the husband could see the Mangal Sutra that she is wearing. And so she says, you have identified it, and therefore you are my husband. And then Harishchandra confesses that yes, he had identified his wife and his child. Then, of course, the Lord comes and blesses him, and he becomes a king once again. But Harishchandra Ghat is also over here. The certain very interesting aspects of the Manikarnika Ghat I learned from the ferrymen, which is that if a person dies in the middle of the night also, the body will be brought to Manikarnika for cremation. In the rest of India, you don't cremate after sunset. You normally keep the the body, and then next day morning, you bring the body over for cremation. Here, it is not so. You cremate at all the time. And at the middle of the night, a puja is done to Lord Vishwanatha. Whoever dies in the middle of the night and is cremated here, those ashes are taken and directly sprayed on Lord Vishwanatha in the temple. And that is the highest that anyone can ever hope for, the greatest end that people can, that is the greatest fate that anybody would want, because that is mukti. In the Mahabharata, in the Vanaparva, when the Pandavas are advised to go on various Tirtha Yatras to various places, there is a description of Varanasi. And that ends with the line, Pranan utsrijya tatraiva moksham prapnoti manavaha. Whoever discards his life in that city, he attains moksha. He or she attains moksha immediately. So Varanasi is Mokshapuri. People arrive here hoping that they would get the kiss of death and that they would not have to ever come back to the world. People come here and wait. In fact, deep down in south, you have Tiruvayyaru, which many people believed was just like Varanasi. So several of the practices in Varanasi were also followed in Tiruvayyaru. That is, if a person was dying, they would put them on a bier and bring them to the river and leave them touching the water till they died. And then the person would be cremated. So if the person died in the middle of the night, he or she had the privilege of his or her ashes being taken for the Abhisheka of Lord Vishwanatha that goes on even today. There are certain people who will never be cremated. Sannyasis, a pregnant woman, a newly born baby, and a person afflicted with leprosy. These four categories of people, their bodies are allowed to drift in the Ganga, which accounts for this description that several people come back with, saying that we were on a boat and we saw a dead body floating by. Of course, in recent months, this has become more of a kind of a practice practically in Uttar Pradesh, but we won't get into that. But these were some of the rules and regulations with which the cremations were and are still conducted along the river. You come to Sankat Mochan Ghat, and that is where you remember Tulsidas. Tulsidas in the 17th century lived in Varanasi, and this is where he composed his Ramcharitmanas in the Avdhi dialect. And Tulsidas was a man of the world. His wife was a woman of very high principles. She had gone to stay with her father for some time, and one night Tulsidas could not bear the pangs of separation. It was raining very heavily. The river was in a flood, but he wanted to be with his wife. He swam across the river, went to the house and found a rope hanging. He climbed up using the rope and reached the bedroom, then discovered that it was a snake that he had climbed up. And then the wife asked him that, for this, you have taken so much of effort. Is there not so much more in life that you need to be doing, a man of your determination? And that is when he completely transforms himself and becomes a great devotee of Lord Rama and writes the Tulsi Ramcharitmanas. There is a beautiful temple to Lord Hanuman in the Sankat Mochan Ghat, which is known as Sankat Mochan Hanuman Mandir. And Sankat Mochan means somebody who destroys all troubles. And this is the Anjaneya that you see where Tulsidas lived. Close to this, you have the Tulsi Manas Mandir, which is a 20th century construction as a tribute to the Ramcharitmanas. And when you go there, you will find that the entire Ramcharitmanas is sculpted in marble plaques all over the temple. It is probably the only shrine for a book. In the sense that, and of course, it's the poet who created it. But we can never, when we go to Kashi, among the many great people who come to mind, definitely Tulsidas is one of them. I now come to Ahalya Bai. I don't know. No, I haven't missed it. Okay. Now, as I said, Aurangzeb sometime in the 17th century completely destroyed the Vishwanatha Swami temple and he built the Jnanvapi mosque over there. Now, within a few years of Aurangzeb's death in the early 1700s, the Mughal Empire was no longer what it was, as we all know. And the Marathas had become very important people, the Peshwas. Then you had, there was a confederacy of the Marathas practically. And they were all, they had become very important people. And the Mughal emperor himself had in several ways become dependent on several people. And so the Marathas had a free access to Varanasi. And today, much of what we see is really the reconstruction of the various Maratha rulers, which is why you will find Gwalior Ghat, Baroda, the Gaikwad Ghat, then the Holkar Ghat, the Bhonsle Ghat. You will find all these on the sides of the river because there's all the reconstructions of the various Maratha rulers. Ahalya Bai was, of course, the Holkar queen, her, selected by her father-in-law to marry her husband, had the misfortune to lose the husband very early, had the misfortune to have a son who was challenged and therefore could not rule, wanted to commit sati on the death of the husband, but the father-in-law dissuaded her from that and said that you are meant for much higher things. You must administer the empire or the kingdom. It wasn't an empire. And after his death, she becomes the queen regent, then becomes the Maharani herself and rules Indore, and even today is held up as the ideal of all wisdom when it comes to kingship. And it is she who rebuilds the Kashi Vishwanatha Swami temple. Of course, this is a statue for her in Indore. This is not she doesn't have a memorial to herself in Varanasi, but you have the Ahilya Bai Ghat. One of the ghats on the river is named after her. On the other side, Kashi is on the western side of the Ganga. On the eastern side, you have the Raja of Ramnagar, the Raja of Banaras. The Banaras, Kashi Naresh, as he is called by the people. This is his palace, the fortress of Ramnagar. The kingdom of Kashi is one of the oldest kingdoms of India. Of course, it is not a continuous dynasty. There have been breaks at several times. But in the Mahabharata, let us not forget that Vichitravirya, when Bhishma's brother, Vichitravirya, was to get married, the three most eligible girls were Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. And they were all princesses of Kashi, Kashi Naresh's daughters. And the Kashi Naresh was so powerful that he considered the Kurus to be inferior clans. And he did not want to conduct the wedding of his daughters to the Kuru prince. And Bhishma actually had to go wage war, kidnap the three princes and bring them back. And of course, as we all know, one of them did not want to marry Vichitravirya, then, and so on. Mahabharata then goes on in a different direction. So that is practically the age of the Kashi kingdom. But the kingdom that we are looking at over here is essentially post-Mughal. As I said, the Mughal Empire was weakening, and then you had a whole lot of satraps. One of them was the Nawab of Oudh, the Nawabs of Awadh. which was Awadh is Lucknow, as we all know, not very far away from Varanasi. And this was a very fertile belt. And this was given to a local leader to administer, and he was Balwant Singh. Balwant Singh then became the ruler, in effect, of Varanasi. He practically became an independent ruler over a period of time. And his son was Chet Singh. More on Chet Singh just a short while from now. But it is that dynasty, and rather curiously, they are Brahmins. They are not Kshatriyas. They are Bhumihar Brahmins, and post-independence, they still administer their estate, which is in this fort. And inside the fort, you have a typical Indo-Saracenic structure built in the late 19th, early 20th century, a hideous museum, very badly curated, full of rusting weapons and cars that are antique cars that are falling apart. And probably they know the value of those cars, or probably they don't know the value of those cars. I have no idea. For some reason, photography is prohibited anywhere inside the buildings. Maybe because they don't want the shabbiness of those buildings to be known outside. But definitely, it's a place worth going to. And it's a huge palace. And a little more on it in a short while from now. But one more thing that I must add over here, that the king of Kasi, the Kasi Naresh, has for the past 250 years been conducting the Ram Leela in Ramnagar. Every year for 31 days, the Ram Leela will happen. It will culminate eventually with the burning of Ravana, Kumbhakarna, and Indrajit. Millions will descend on Ramnagar to witness this grand finale to the Ram Leela, which goes on for 31 days. This is again James Prinsep's drawing done in the 19th century of the Ram Leela that he witnessed just outside the Ramnagar fort. As I said, so, you know, the British had a very troubled relationship with the Rajas of Benares. So nominally, these were all feudatories of the Nawabs of Oudh. The Nawabs of Oudh were not able to control them. Finally, the Nawabs handed over the Benares to the British East India Company and said, you do what you want with it. We cannot control these people. So Warren Hastings in the 1770s was entrusted with bringing Varanasi under control. And he had a redoubtable enemy in Chet Singh, who was Balwant Singh's son. And Chet Singh rebelled against Warren Hastings, defeated him in one battle, finally was let down by his own generals and had to flee to Gwalior, where he was made a Jagirdar, but always under the protection of the Maharaja of Gwalior, who in any case was, he had treated with the British. So he was in effect keeping a troublesome adversary under control. And Chet Singh therefore spent the rest of his life in Gwalior. Chet Singh's nephew was then recognized as the Raja of Benares. And then post the mutiny in 1857, Benares became a state. It became a 13-gun salute state, and very important as far as the British were concerned. All the viceroys arrived over here on state visits. And Maharaja Vibhuti Narayan Singh and all his predecessors, they were all strict vegetarians. They were at their wits' end as to how to, kind of entertain these meat-eating infidels. But they did do it. And the most interesting thing is, of course, that the Kasi Naresh every morning had to wake up to look. His eyes had to, as it is said, his benign gaze had to be cast on a cow. The first thing in the morning when he woke up, he had to see a cow. So a cow would be led into the bedchamber and he would look at it, and then only he would get up. Now, when he went to Rampur as a guest of the Nawab of Rampur, the bedroom was on the second floor. How do you get a cow? So the Nawab of Rampur had a crane, and the cow was lifted every morning on the crane. And the animal was so terrified that it would move, and everybody in the palace would wake up along with the Maharaja just to ensure that the Maharaja had come to the veranda and taken a good look at the cow. Then the crane would be lowered, cow would then be let go. So this was Benares State. And you must remember there was a Benares State Bank as well, which later came to grief under the hands of P. Rajaratnam, the corporate raider who appeared in the early 21st century and then vanished also with equal alacrity. We don't know what happened to him afterwards. And we don't know what happened to Benares State Bank as well after that. Then we come to Kabir. The Bhakti movement in Varanasi during the 15th and the 16th centuries. Tulsidas was certainly one of them. Sant Raidas, Ravidas was one of them. Guru Nanak came to Varanasi and incorporated several of Kabir's dohas into the Guru Granth Sahib, and therefore that marks the beginning of Sikhism as well. Kabir was this great seer, this renunciate, this practically an Advaitin, a Muslim who knew enough about Hindu practices to criticize both, and then to continuously talk to us about how God is one and love and affection is the only way through which we can reach God. So, poti pad pad jag bhuva, pandit bhaya na koi. Having read books and books and books, nobody became a pandit. Dai aakhar prem ka pade so pandit hoy. That 2.5 letter word prem, if you understand the meaning of that, you become a pandit. This was one of Kabir's great sayings. Kabir was a weaver. He was a julaha. And that brings us to the great weaving tradition of Varanasi. But Kabir was a cotton weaver. He was not a silk weaver. And silk itself comes to Varanasi only around 150 years after Kabir. Probably when there was a great famine in Gujarat and several weavers left in the 1600s, they migrated to Varanasi. They then began the silk tradition for which Varanasi is famous even today. It has got a GI tag, and certainly it's something that lots of people go over only for that. Varanasi is also known for its akhadas, or boxing schools, training schools, bodybuilders and boxers, the traditional Indian style of kushti, and they are known as pehelwans. And for this, I have just put up this Chet Singh Ghat over here because I spoke to you about the rebellion of Chet Singh against Warren Hastings. Chet Singh was greatly helped by the pehelwans who formed a great part of his army. In fact, Jayashankar Prasad, the great Hindi novelist, has written a lovely short story called Kashi Ka Gunda, which is about the lifestyle of the pehelwans and how one of them eventually sacrifices his life in order to ensure that Chet Singh leaves Benares safely and goes to Gwalior to seek shelter over there. So the akhadas are a must visit. The Sankat Mochan Mandir itself is part of an akhada. There is an akhada just next to it. And that is where you will find from youngsters right up to well-built youth, everybody is practicing under the watchful eyes of a guru. And they have several very strict rules and regulations. It's a world by itself that is just worth going there and taking a look. They are very tourist friendly, incidentally. If you ever want to go there, they allow people to come, they allow people to photograph and everything, but it's a must see if you go to Varanasi. Then we come to, this is what you will see when you go down the ghat. Suddenly you will find Tamil, Shiva Shiva, and then you will find Bengali, you'll find, so this is called the Kedar Ghat. And with the Kedar Ghat, I think I will move on to the great South Indian influences on Varanasi and the influence that Varanasi has had on South India. So Arunagirinatha in the 15th century has composed a Tirupugal on Varanasi. So a Murugan temple in Varanasi, we don't know where it is. But this particular temple, which is administered by the Kumaraswamy Mutt in the Tamil lines, they now claim that Arunagirinatha composed it here. And definitely this is a traditional South Indian temple. This is the Kedar Ghat. Next to that, that Indo-Saracenic building that you see is the Vijayanagaram Ghat. That was built by the Maharajas of Vijayanagaram. And so Mysore Ghat, then you've got Lalita Ghat built by the Nepal Ranas, all of them with their own individual regional stamp of architecture. It's just mind-boggling when you go down the boat to see all of this. Sarfoji, the Maratha ruler of Tanjavur, he makes the journey in the early 19th century to Varanasi. A king from the south traveling all the way to Benares via Calcutta. It was great cause for excitement. He was a pensioner of the East India Company. By then, the company Bahadur makes all the arrangements for his travel. There is a song in Marathi, Sarfoji Maharaja Chya Tristali Yatra Lavani. It's a Lavani which is composed on his journey going from Tanjavur all the way to Kashi and coming back. And the very beginning of it, I have only read a Tamil translation. This is what makes you very often regret that we know only few languages. And if only I could read the original Marathi, because there is so much of drama, you know, the nagaras beating, the doors opening, the king coming out on his horse called Shambhu Prasad, then him going to Darbaranyeshwara temple to pray, then he departs and the people following. Oh, the magnificence of the drama of the king leaving for Kashi. In those days, if you left for Kashi, of course, Sarfoji being king, everything was taken care. But if you left for Kashi, there was no guarantee that you would ever come back. As N.S. Krishnan used to say in his Kindanath Charitram, people would get on to a bullock cart and go to Kashi. Very often, only the bullocks would come back. Nobody else would be there. Everybody would have died en route. There was no guarantee about reaching Kashi. Now, if Sarfoji went with all that drama, Muthuswami Dikshitar, the great Carnatic composer, probably walked the entire distance. 1795, starting from Madras with his 2 wives and in the company of his guru Chidambaranatha Yogi, going all the way to Varanasi. Maybe it took a year, and then spending 3 to 4 years over there, and then coming back and then starting off on his great composing career. The South Indians have left their imprint with the Visalakshi temple. Vishwanatha's consort, as far as we are concerned, is Visalakshi. Vishwanathar, Visalakshi. This is built by the Nagarattar community, the Chettiars of Karaikudi. They have their Chatram just next to this temple. They conduct all the worship over here. Everything here is as per the South Indian Agamic traditions. And you will find all the signboards are in Tamil all around this particular temple. Coming to the last few slides of my presentation, Varanasi is home to some great music. Great music. The Banaras Gharana, of course, starts off as a tabla gharana, but then it incorporates a lot of vocal music, the khayal, the dadra, the thumri. These are all forms of Hindustani music that emanated from Varanasi. Every year you have the great Sankat Mochan Music Festival, which has been going on for 90 years and more. It's just a few years older than our December Music Festival. And perhaps among the finest exponents of the Banaras Gharana was Siddheshwari Devi, who was known as Ma to most people. Siddheshwari Devi, there is of course a wonderful biography on her by her daughter Savita Devi. But if you want to read the finest account of what a wonderful human being she was, then you must read Sheela Dhar's Raga and Josh. It's one of the, it gives you a most endearing picture of Siddheshwari Devi. Do we have a couple of minutes? Can I just play some her voice?
Yes, Sri Ram, of course.
Siddheshwari Devi was the great friend of M.S. Subbulakshmi, coming often to Madras, staying in Kalki Gardens, teaching M.S. Subbulakshmi music, performing in the music academies, December Music Festival. She was a very familiar face over here. And of course, I will leave you to read Sheela Dhar to get the entire story of Siddheshwari Devi. Hilarious in parts, moving in parts, but then that is a true artist's life. Benares is also known for its spicy cuisine. All the chaats and the golgappas and everything else, even the dum aloo here is spicy. So if you're the kind of person who has got digestive issues, you have to be a little careful. But they say that it is the flavor of the Ganga water that gives these vegetables that makes these vegetables taste the way they taste. But certainly it's something very unique. And when you're there, you should never forget the Banarsi Pan. That is a ritual or a tradition by itself. At the end of every meal, you have to have a Banarsi Pan, completely polished brass plate, where he will place the leaf and then he will add little ingredients, wash it in some water, which is better not to ask what it is. But at the end of it, it just tastes outstanding. And make sure that if you are not tobacco friendly, then don't ask for a Zarda Pan, you ask for a Meetha Pan. But the people who have the Zarda Pan have told me that the Meetha Pan is nothing in comparison to what the Zarda Pan is. But yes, Banarsi Pan is very, very famous. I put the chilies over here rather than the pan because I have never seen chilies of this color. When I went to Ramnagar, this is what greeted me, and I found it to be so fascinating that I took this photograph and said, this is what I'm going to put up. Banaras is also home to this great center of education, the Banaras Hindu University. 1,300 acres of land given by the Maharaja of Banaras in the early 20th century. When Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya and Annie Besant wanted to start a college over here, the Hindu College, which later became the seed for this great university. It still remains a great center for education and a tribute to the wisdom of its founder. I'm concluding my presentation with the Ganga Aarti. Having wandered all around Varanasi, having been butted by the cows, lost your footwear, then refound your footwear, then having eaten here, there, everywhere, you finally get onto the boat to come and witness the Ganga Aarti in the evening. Dusk is slowly falling and you find that the crowds are beginning to build up. Your boatman, if he is wise, will take you to a particular vantage point in the river from where you can stand in the boat and watch the Ganga Aarti as it unfolds. All the ghats will begin coming out. People will begin coming out. Of course, the biggest ones happen in the Dashashwamedh. This is where the denouement or the great grand finale of the Ganga Aarti really happens. Now, of course, it's very dramatized as well. But that's okay. I mean, we do need to dramatize these things. After all, when you go to the Tower of London and you have a heritage walk over there, the Beefeaters dramatize everything, don't they? We accept that. So this also needs to be dramatized if we want to bring out all the color that we are capable of bringing out. And I'll show you a small video, just a 30-second video of the Ganga Aarti. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. So to conclude, Varanasi is one place that is full of life. Yes, it has a lot of negatives. There is the problem of sanitation, the continuous pollution of the Ganga, the filth that is there, the treatment of widows, the widows' homes, the poverty that you see, certainly all of that is there. But then it is we, the people, who make all that, don't we? And if we rejoice in the color, I think we also need to contribute to the improvement of the place in some way or the other. So with that thought, I will conclude my presentation. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them on.
Shreeram,
A big hand for that.
Yeah. Just ask one thing. Javanti?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to ask Shreeram, my friends in Varanasi are saying after Modi won his election from there has been a lot of transformation in Varanasi.
Yes, I did see that. See, there are two sides to the whole thing. One is from the tourist point of view, there is a big transformation. There is a lot of, there is a relative opening up of walking spaces, and then the ghats have become a lot cleaner as compared to what they were. The huge amounts of filth have definitely reduced to a certain extent. The locals, see, this is where administering India becomes such a peculiar issue. The vested interests, which are the locals, they have all along made their money in the chaos that abounded in Varanasi. So what happens is, like, for instance, you have a temple. The number of temples in Varanasi cannot be counted. It's not like Madras or Tanjavur or Kanchipuram where you've got, say, 3,000 temples or something. No. This must be running into millions. And every temple has got a set of small, originally it must have had a set of streets around it, in which shops must have come up. And then the shopkeepers would have built their residences above the shops. Eventually, they build their houses on top of the temple as well. So the temple becomes a part of a house. So for instance, you go to certain temples. I went looking for one that was associated with Carnatic music. It is part of a house today. And that is the normal practice in Varanasi. People have built houses with that temple right in the middle. And so there is no way that you can free the temples from all that, because this is all people having taken possession. If you remove them from there, that becomes a major question, right issue. I have been living here for so many generations now. Why is this, why am I being evacuated or evicted from here? That's one thing. The other is, as I said, they thrive on that chaos. So for instance, this whole concept of Varanasi Vishwanath temple worship, there is a very well administered government run department in charge of worshipping Vishwanath Swami in Varanasi. You need to go to that office, very clean, and you pay money. They take you to a locker where you put your cell phone, your wallet, anything made of leather, you put inside that locker. You are given the key. You are attached to an official panda. You are given one prasadam plate, and then you walk along, you clutch that panda for dear life, because if you lose him, then you are lost forever. You can be wandering around Varanasi for the rest of your life. So then you go, you worship, and you come back. So many people don't know about the existence of that department. So they are caught hold of by pandas who charge exorbitant fees. There was a couple who was fighting in front of us. They had been charged 5,000 bucks for the worship that we paid 100 rupees or 200 rupees or some such thing by going through the official channel. So there is a lot of dislike for bringing in order. It's a very Indian psyche. Take the Kalighat temple in Calcutta, for instance. Frightening experience to go there. But nobody will want it to change. They are all very happy with that system. That's the way they are living.
Thank you.
So true.
I don't think there are any more questions, Sri Ram, because you have given us so much to think about that we don't know what else to ask you about the subject.
Thank you.
Yes, and may I call on past President Uma Mohan to please propose a vote of thanks today.
Javanti, I had a question.
Oh, you did? Not in chat.
Yes, in chat, as to why it was Benares and why Sri Ram explained why it's Varanasi. I wanted to know why it was Benares.
It just got corrupted. Like Varanasi got corrupted to Benares with the arrival of the
English did it.
Yeah, that's right. Just the syllables were juxtaposed. If you look at it, Varanasi became Banarasi. So the Na and the Ra got interchanged. And that's how the new name came about. Now it's back to being Varanasi.
Okay.
Javanti, can I have one small?
Yes, you can. I think Sri Ram is pressed for time. Let's see.
Oh.
Yeah, it's okay. No problem. I still have 5 minutes.
Okay. Sri Ram, is there a Varanasi beyond the Ghats? I mean, I know that
there is a lot of Varanasi beyond the Ghats. For instance, there is a cantonment. There are several schools. It's there's one side of it that is a relatively modern town.
Not the civil life, not the civil. I'm not talking about life. I'm talking about tourist centers beyond the Ghats for tourists.
Not much. The problem with Varanasi is it is so absorbing of your energies that you rarely ever look to see what is beyond Varanasi, the Ganga side of it. That is really the problem, because when you go there, there is so much to do, so much to see, that you rarely look beyond what is there. Unless you've seen something else that you would like to share.
No. We've had so much of inner wheel in Varanasi. I don't think you want to hear that.
Okay. Uma, are you there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good evening. I would like to thank V. Sri Ram for this wonderful, enthralling talk that he has given us about Varanasi, starting with all the religious thing. He has literally covered every aspect of Varanasi that each and every one of us know. And I guess we are all intrigued about knowing and visiting many of these places, which we may have missed out in our previous visits. And I loved the way he started with all the religious thing, went to this thing, then about the weavers, and then to the universities and everything, music. There was not one aspect that he didn't cover. So I really, really thank him for this wonderful, wonderful speech. Very well. Thank you so much, Sriram. Really nice to have spent so much time with us.
Thank you.
There are lots of comments, Sriram, about the talk. How interesting, how amazing, how wonderful.
Yeah, everybody has said a very interesting, wonderful, insightful. I think you can just add every adjective that you can think of, Sriram.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
I think I have to go again to Varanasi now.
Yes, of course. We are going in February 2022.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sriram.
Thank you, Sriram.
Thank you, Sharada. I'm sorry I didn't welcome you right in the beginning. I noticed that you were there as well.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Jayanti. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Sarda.
Hi.
Mridula here.
Hello, Auntie. How are you?
I'm fine. I've been in touch with your mother on and off.
So I'll sign off, Javanti. I'll see you later.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful talk. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you, Javanti. Very nice
welcome,
talk.
welcome.
Thank you, Javanti. Very nice.
Early.
Glad so many of you all could come. I think Prabha Raghunandan was also here.
Yeah,
She just left a little while.
Okay.
Javanti, I sort of welcomed everybody that I could.
Yes, I know. I also welcomed as I saw. Hi, Usha.
Hey, please. Gita Padmanabhan, Shashi
Yes.
Gupta, Raghunan.
Okay, good. That you were
But
welcome.
Kamala, same triennial we have attended twice here. So for me, Varanasi.
Hey, Radha.
Hey, ஒரு வாட்டி ஒன்ன felicitate பண்றாங்க எல்லாரும் வந்தோம். Please.
Felicitation, yes. But
And
also,
he combined with some other program, but we have been to Varanasi twice.
Kamala, I
remember our
I
trip
too was
to
wondering
Varanasi
why so
and
many
Saranath, everything.
and Rama and I went for a meeting.
Yeah.
No, before.
And I one day will tell you how we were hosted in Varanasi. That's a different story already.
Yeah.